How big of a challenge is dyslexia? How many kids do you think this impacts across Montana, and what is not being done right now?
Well, we believe that, and from some studies, we've got up to 20% of the population has dyslexia.
Wow.
And we have some schools that are addressing it, but most of the schools in Montana have taken sort of the attitude, well, we don't really have any state law that says we need to take and really look at it. There actually is, though, federal law and there's state guidance from OPI. And the reason why I got involved in the bill is because I have a granddaughter that has dyslexia. And in Billings, the processes we were going through with trying to get the school to recognize she was having a reading problem and asking questions about, do you think it's dyslexia? My son and daughter-in-law ended up going and getting a private tutor. And so when I started working on the bill, I started talking to LT and OPI to find out what was going on, and found out there was some work being done with putting together a task force to start addressing dyslexia. And we had several other legislators that had been involved in education that were starting to address the issue. But the big problem is we've got all these kids, and you need to catch the condition in kindergarten and first or second grade. Otherwise, it becomes a major, major problem. The kids' brains are different than the other 80% of the population, and you can teach them to read, but you can't teach them to read using the current reading methods we have in the schools right now. So
from what we've heard, it can make a big difference. I think it was Lindell and Laurel, I think, if I remember right, who called in earlier this week, and she said, "Hey, these kids, they might have a challenge with dyslexia, but they're actually greatly advanced in other areas. So if we can get them across this dyslexia hump, like you say, with early detection, early screening, it's going to make a traumatic difference in these young people's lives." But yeah, talk a little bit about that angle.
Yeah, absolutely. These kids, as well as having a brain that processes words and things they see a lot different than the rest of us, they are also blessed with being quite creative. And some of the really great people out there that have been really successful have learned how to deal with their disability. And the people we had testifying at the hearing yesterday are the highly motivated moms and dads that are going to make sure their kids succeed regardless of what the public education is providing. But we have lots and lots of kids in Montana that are lower income, or their families aren't quite as aggressive of taking care of situations where the schools can't take care of it. And so the bill's really important for that, too, as well, not only to help the kids that their parents are doing the intervention for them, but to help those kids out there that don't have the resources, the money, the tutoring can cost thousands of dollars. And while most of the people that were speaking yesterday at the hearing had taken that on and they had quit jobs, they had learned, they'd started homeschooling their kids, they'd done a lot of things to help their kids. Not all families are that fortunate.
So I read this report by Nicolas Garcia for NBC Montana talking about a bill that would define dyslexia as a learning disability and require schools to screen for it. That's making its way through the state legislature. We're talking about that legislation this morning here with the bill sponsor, State Senator Carrie Smith, out of Billings. And then I was reading this NBC Montana report. Apparently in the nation, 42 states have laws on dyslexia screening in schools. Montana is one of 8 that do not. So I'm wondering, what's been the holdup in Montana, or is there any pushback that's expected for this legislation? Because it sounded like there was just overwhelming support for it yesterday. And Helena, Carrie Smith, any thoughts? Do you expect pushback on this legislation at all?
Well, Aaron, I really don't expect any pushback on it. When I started working on the bill, we were finding out that so many people are affected by the condition, and we really do have a lot of support from the education community with OPI and LC, and we had a member of the Board of Education that was at our hearing yesterday that was very supportive of it. While we see that a lot of other states are doing things, through my research I have found that a lot of states have laws, but the states aren't really enacting those laws. And so this is really kind of a more recent thing, I think, that a lot of people are becoming aware of, that what dyslexia is. We may be a little bit more behind in Montana on it, but the states that actually have implemented some legislation, from talking to people that work with social media groups. They're still struggling in those states, even though they have legislation. So the part that you were talking about, the screening, probably is the most important part of the bill, because while we sometimes struggle with implementing things through the schools or through other government agencies, once a parent knows that their child has a condition, that relieves a lot of the anxiety about wondering what's wrong with my child, why aren't they learning, what's taking place, what's happening. And like I mentioned earlier, the people that we had at the hearing last night, they're very aggressive parents that are going to make sure their kids get the breaks, and they're working with private tutors. So this is going to start rolling it that way. We're working on a task force with OPI to start implementing a lot of provisions of the bill. I spent the whole day Tuesday off campus with this task force, and so I'm really encouraged about that. Just bringing the awareness forward is going to be super. I'm looking at, I think, is that Color 8 report you were talking about. It's got a survey on it on how many people think we ought to be doing something on this and how many think we should not. And it looks like 91% of the people that are responding to this survey are in favor of doing something and getting this legislation passed.